Hey, welcome everybody. I was just kind of commenting on the weather there, but kind of reflecting that this would be a week where we would be getting ready for the launch of the Fringe and Festival. So I think it would be this coming weekend. So as usual, we'd have loads of people swarming around in ponchos, trying to avoid the Edinburgh weather as they were kind of gearing up for the festivals. But some stark figures, Laurence, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I was looking at the footfall for the city centre. I don't know whether you were going to cover any of that, but some pretty stark numbers. July 2019, footfall for the city centre was 2.2 million. July 2019, 2.2 million. July 2020, 236,000. So 190% reduction in footfall in Edinburgh. I was chatting with the Hoteliers Association. They're down from probably average of 92% over the summer to 19%. Bizarrely, another 190% reduction. And I think even optimistically, they're only forecasting 45% occupancy for August and September. So kind of pretty stark numbers, and then add that to the claimant numbers. I think we had them last week, so unemployment claimant numbers in the city. They're up 192%. I think in June 2019, 6,105. June 2020, 17,850. So I guess as head of strategy and insights, you've got your hands full figuring out how does the city respond to this. Not alone, but a staggering challenge ahead. So I'm sure people have lots of questions and really keen to hear what you've got to say. So I'm just going to kind of, with that context, I'm going to hand over to you, Laurence, hear the updates, and hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, I want to welcome Laurence Rockey, who is head. I think you might have changed your job title, but I think it's head of strategy and insights. Is that correct?
Slightly, yeah. It's now strategy and comms, Liz.
Okay,
so
right.
I took on the communications function a little while back. So I do, so I'm Laurence. I kind of a corporate centre of kind of business change policy, as well as council communications. So as Liz said, it's been a very challenging time. I actually was going to start with the tension, I think, between the kind of public health dimensions and challenges that we still face versus the economic ones. So Liz's kind of statistics, which are really helpful, and I guess if anyone's been to a kind of bar or a restaurant or a shop or a barber's in the city centre, still finds it's still quite surprising, isn't it, how quiet everything is. So from your decisions around reopening your offices to broader decisions around how you support the economy, there's that massive need to respond to the biggest economic crisis probably the city's had since the Second World War, versus the very real risk that COVID hasn't gone away. And whilst obviously the numbers in Scotland are very low, which is very much to be welcomed, we can see from other places in the UK and around the world that risk hasn't gone away. So I think you see the tension. Maybe if you're the kind of director from the IJB, you probably come at it from a kind of public health dimension. If you're Paul Laurence and you're a director of place, you probably slightly come at it from the economic dimension. And I think that tension between both objectives will continue to play out. Something that we're doing is doing a report to committee in August about the potential of concurrent risks coming to bear. So you've got Brexit at the end of the year. What happens if you had another beast from the east, as well as further outbreaks of COVID? Let's call it a second wave, if you like. Although I think it's probably more likely to be localised than a kind of second wave across the piece. So how does the council support the city to operate in that context? And we're starting to think about our kind of emergency planning in the context of multiple risks rather than just singular ones, because the whole way I think you respond to both business continuity has just changed so fundamentally. Just in very practical terms, what's kind of keeping the council very busy at the moment in terms of debate is the kind of wider service resumption. So you've seen a large amount of council services come back on stream. Clearly the biggest one and the most complex is the reopening of schools, which are due to reopen on the 12th of August. Scottish Government obviously made a very significant decision to not have social distancing in schools, and therefore a reopening of schools largely as they were, and that also applies to transportation of children to schools. So, but just the sheer scale of that across the city has been a major task for the council. So I think it will be a major milestone when they reopen on the 12th of August. Much smaller but quite politically contentious is just the reopening of libraries and community centres, even indeed public toilets. Those who are kind of following council services will see there's quite a lot of debate of reopening, public conveniences in Portobello or the Links, for example. And the challenge for us is how to do that in a safe way. And also it's costing us £300,000 a year more to open 3 public toilets than it did previously, because opening a public toilet post-COVID is much more, is a different beast. So it's a tiny, almost flippant example, but it just speaks to some of the challenges that everything is different, and also everything has a different financial implication, which is challenging for us right now. So there was a budget update to committee last week. COVID has cost the council about £90 million so far, driven very much around the loss of income. We're a very income-driven local authority compared to others in Scotland. So parking income being a good example. And we have used reserves. We have had additional funding from Scottish Government, but we've still got an in-year pressure around £20 million. And I guess we're probably looking at an ongoing budget deficit of around £30 to £40 million a year. So how you resume services, how we support the economy, how we do the things that we need to do to get the city moving, whilst also dealing with some very significant financial challenges, is certainly a real concern for us at this point. And just on the service resumption piece, this is very important from a business perspective, is we've made a decision not to reopen our office, particularly Waverley Court, City Chambers, until the October half term. And clearly under the Scottish Government roadmap at the moment, it's quite difficult to open your office buildings to anything like normal whilst the social distancing rules remain as they are. But I think there is a wider question about the future model of the council, when actually it's worked surprisingly well working from home. Having said that, if you walk around where Waverley Court is, you see the importance of that our buildings and people being open to local businesses, etc. So there's that very real tension in the office-based question that we are certainly debating a lot at the moment, and I think will play out over coming time. I don't know, Liz, how the kind of support for business. Do you want me to go give an update on that, or have you had a reasonably recent update?
Good to kind of just cover it again. I know you've done a lot of work around licensing and planning and trying to get businesses open, but I guess for me, jobs has to be the number one issue. And I know you're reigniting the Edinburgh Guarantee, but I think the challenge that I've been kind of throwing out there is, to me, it's priority or preferable to protect jobs rather than try and reskill and re-job people. So just your thoughts beyond Edinburgh Guarantee. What's the council thinking about how we keep businesses open and protect jobs?
Sure. So huge issue. So the grants programme is now, of Scottish Government, that we've been implementing, is now finished. £112 million of grants being supported to local businesses. So a key element of that question, Liz, necessary but not sufficient. As we said, we'll be doing a lot of support for local businesses, and there's a report to full council tomorrow that sets out all our work, but including a communications campaign called Ready, Steady, Go, which is about providing guidance and support for businesses to help them navigate the minefield that is COVID, in terms of what it means for their businesses. Obviously, there's been a commitment to work with ETAG on a campaign for supporting the tourism industry, with funding from from City of Edinburgh Council being funded to support that programme. I think in main terms, the way the council in the short term can support protecting jobs, I think 3 things to say. One is that most of our capital programmes are now back up and running, Tram being a good example, and obviously those will have a number of cost implications for us in terms of the costs of COVID, both in terms of the pause in construction, but also wider costs that are going up as a result. but clearly the money that we put into the system, be it school construction or tram or other infrastructure projects, is critical to that sector. So big decisions there. Clearly our procurement spend is equally very significant for the city, and we have a number of I can get more detail on this, but we do a lot to ensure that we're paying people very quickly and that money continues to flow, and that has included a number of payments to providers of our services in transportation, in terms of childcare, who haven't been delivering for us but for whom we've continued to pay for quite the reasons that Liz has set out. I think the broader questions about what does the Scottish Government's kind of economic recovery look like, what does the cities look like, is there is clearly more to do. And coming out of the Higgins report recommendations, how does the council respond to that? What does an Edinburgh guarantee look like in the context of a national scheme? I think there's still more to be done. I expect you can see more work over the coming days and weeks. There is not millions of pounds of money waiting in a kind of council reserve fund to do lots more. So it is going to require a partnership with Scottish Government. But clearly the consequences of the economy are only starting to be felt as furlough starts to ease off, etc. We're going to see the realities of that coming to play much more clearly over the coming weeks and months. And that's why the council's adaptation renewal programme, which is the language we're using for our recovery, has sustainable economic recovery at its heart. One thing that's really worth your members being aware of is that we obviously have very ambitious targets as the council and hopefully as a city for becoming carbon net zero by 2030. And we have an independent climate commission chaired by Dr. Sam Gardner, who's done an interim report setting out how the economic recovery can be one that aligns with our 2030 net zero targets. Now, clearly there'll be a debate in your members about whether sustainability or carbon reduction should be a priority right now, given the challenges of the economy. It's the council's view that actually we don't take the opportunity now to rebuild our economy in a sustainable way, then perhaps that opportunity will never arise. And if we do it right, there is lots of opportunity for new growth sectors, for new skills, to leverage investment both in the private sector and the public sector to kind of kickstart our recovery. So you clearly see massive shifts in transportation over recent months, although that is changing again and are yet to settle down. But how we build a public transportation system, whether COVID encourages more local based working and living, and therefore how we design the transportation network across for the city are some big questions. But at the heart of the recommendation is that future capital investment needs to be aligned to a kind of green recovery, and that it's fundamental we do that in partnership with Scottish Government. So really worth having a look at that report from Dr. Sam Gardner, who's from Scottish Power, who chairs the commission. And as we work to a new council business plan, how we drive forward a sustainable reform of the city is at the very heart of what we're doing, as is the Poverty Commission, which is due to publish its final report in September and is keen to engage with the private sector before its launch, Liz. So maybe there's an action for us to take away to set up some further discussion with the Commission. But how do we ensure the recommendations of the Commission, particularly around, I guess, in the private sector in terms of the Fair Work agenda, how that bleeds into the economic recovery piece as well. So I don't pretend there's not some difficult conversations or some challenges for business in that context, but I think the council is setting out a very clear stall, and that is clear in all of it does. And in the new business plan that we'll be producing for next year, combating poverty, sustainability and well-being will be at the heart of the council's agenda. So from your members planning their businesses, there's certainly opportunities and challenges there, but at least you're getting a clear message from where the council is coming from a kind of high policy perspective. And I'll just one more point, and then I've probably done my update, Liz, and happy to take questions, is the final big thing that's obviously affecting council business at the moment is a debate around equalities, and particularly in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And there was a council report at the Policy and Sustainability Committee last week that looked at what the council was doing as an employer, what the council was doing in terms of its framework, working with the public sector for promoting equalities. And there's also a commitment to setting up an independent review group chaired by someone from the BAME community who would look at the legacy of slavery in the city, which obviously has been a topical issue over recent months. I do think the equalities agenda will remain, not just in terms of equalities in terms of race, but in terms of equalities in terms of gender, disabilities, etc. I think that will remain an important part of the council's decision making in the coming weeks and years, which again, I think is an important thing, and I think again has the potential to be beneficial for business if we do it in the right way. But certainly a big issue in council terms right now. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, hopefully helpful, but happy to take any questions on anything as best I can.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you very much, Laurence. I've got millions of questions, but I always hog the mic, so I better hand over and see if anybody else, if you just kind of wave or stick your hand up, Rebecca will bring you in to ask your question. Is that Paul? You changing your button there, or are you putting your hand up, Paul McLennan? You're okay. Okay, I'll come in then. I guess for me, I mean, do you think the city, the council are cited sufficiently on the issues that businesses are facing? Because I know in Glasgow they've got this sort of long established 10-year industry body, and I think before Benny Higgins had even published his report, they had already come together with their priorities for Glasgow. I'm aware that such a body doesn't exist in Edinburgh, and I just wonder, are there any plans to establish one, or do you feel that you are well enough engaged with business?
Yeah, good question, Liz. Obviously there's the Edinburgh Business Forum that, and I think compared with other places, that kind of the structural engagement perhaps isn't so consistent that it is in other cities that I've worked with. Whether you need that forum in order to have a kind of two-way dialogue across the multiple sectors exists, I think, is a kind of open question. So I think we're certainly wanting to listen to where business is coming from. Clearly, we've got lots of data, and across the different teams, we're doing a lot of work with the business community. I think we obviously we've done as the leader of the council, for example, done a series of roundtables with the hospitality and tourism industry to understand the particular issues and concerns facing them, given the pretty existential challenges that they are facing at the moment, although not the only sector facing challenges, of course. Clearly, we're engaging with you regularly. So I think setting up a kind of new structural way of engaging with the business community hasn't been seen to be the most important thing of the list right now in terms of helping business to respond. But I think if we've got that wrong, then I don't think there's a closed door to that, Liz. I think there's just been a sense of, to me, to focus on the kind of action and formal networks across a range of different sectors versus a kind of catch-all piece that you've described in Glasgow. But I think you can argue it either way, to be honest. But I think we certainly want to be in a position, and certainly from a communications perspective, where, you know, the business community feel like we're engaging with them.
I mean, to be honest, I have to say, so I'll bring you in a minute, Andrew. I have to say that in terms of our engagement with City Council, it's excellent. I mean, we have a great relationship, great access to all levels, you know, from the elected members through to the executive team. So, you know, I think there definitely is, you're in listening mode, but it was really just kind of that structure piece. Andrew, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so Laurence, I'm Andrew Morrison. I'm the founder of AM Bid. We're Scotland's largest bid and tender specialists. We actually help organisations to win public sector contracts. The council obviously are a big, user of public sector contracts. There is, procurement has definitely been on a go slow because obviously they've had to focus on very important things around, feeding people, meals, PPE, the care sector, etc. However, getting normal procurement back, would be really good and really helpful. And I think on the communications side, it would be helpful perhaps if the council were able to indicate exactly what contracts are going to be coming to the market and when they're coming to the market between now and the end of March. and then also a look ahead from April onwards, because getting that sort of information into local organisations' hands could be very helpful with their planning.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, as I mentioned, obviously, kind of the money that we spend, probably 300, 400 million pounds a year. So, and I definitely take the point about, if potential bidders can see a kind of a pipeline coming down the track, then that is really helpful from their business perspective. So, I think that's a really good suggestion. So I'll just take that back to procurement colleagues, and perhaps whoever comes next after me, Liz, whether it's Andrew Kerr, can follow up back round on our response to that. So there's a bit of a feedback loop. But I think that's a really helpful suggestion. I don't know what technical barriers there may or may not be, because I'm not a procurement expert, but the principle makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Paul, is that you wanting to come in?
Yeah, yeah, Liz, thank you. Laurence, my name's Paul McLennan, and I work with Playfair Scotland Communications Company, work beside Donald Anderson. I'm also a councillor in East Lothian. The question I wanted to ask was around about with furlough coming to end at the end of October and the Christmas festival being scaled back, is there any specific initiatives around about probably the quieter time of the year from October probably through to February about trying to help businesses get through that period? Normally they have summer, I suppose the summer income to try and get them through that time, but is there any specific initiatives to try and get them through the quieter winter months?
So not that I'm aware of as yet, Paul. As you say, the discussions around the kind of Christmas markets are ongoing, and clearly pre-COVID there was an attempt to make one of the ways that you balance the tensions around tourism was to making it as 365 days a year industry as well as it was just in summer. So clearly the work about how our recovery support for the economy more broadly is by no means concluded, and clearly, as I said, to some degree we need to do that in step with Scottish Government. So we're not either duplicating nor are we potentially finding potential additional funding to help us with such initiatives. But what we're doing about the lean months, particularly in the tourism sector, I think is a very good question. But we don't have any kind of structural programs in the pipeline as yet, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can just come in just quickly there, part of the sort of the strategic implementation group for the tourism strategy, they're working very closely with ETAG. I sit on SIG, and I think we all collectively have to almost reimagine sort of Christmas and Hogmanay now. And there were some really innovative ideas about, instead of having one big street party, which obviously is not possible, could we have a collection of every pub and restaurant in Edinburgh have their own individual Hogmanay party, and then we sell Edinburgh as the capital of Hogmanay still in the world, but everybody has their own individual celebration, and we can still come together as a city collectively. So I think that we do need to start reimagining how we do things, because I think with the loss of the summer festivals and the income for businesses over that period, we've got to be looking for the winter festival and Hogmanay to see how that can support the city recover. But I do think we need to be cleverer and a bit more imaginative about it. But there's a lot of work going on, and hopefully we'll be able to share that. But again, City Council are leading on that. Adam McVeigh chairs SIG, and Andrew Kerr, and Paul Laurence, very engaged with what's going on there. So, Laurence, you kind of mentioned the financial situation of the City Council. So I suspect intervention in terms of continuing to support business pretty tight. But I was speaking to some big investors in the city who have investments, say, in Porto, Lisbon, Helsinki, and they're obviously seeing the same patterns of loss of footfall in the city centre, but they are throwing that isn't a possibility. Does Scottish Government have any plans or funding available? Because I do think we've got to start animating the city, and even if we're bringing domestic visitors, there needs to be a big drive to support that. have you heard anything from Scottish Government?
Yeah, sorry, Liz, you kind of broke up there towards the second half of that. So I don't know whether I caught quite the whole of your question, but there is, as I said, there's kind of the support for local businesses. There's a whole report going to council tomorrow, so definitely worth a quick, certainly worth the chamber perhaps having a quick look at that. And there's more detail on that in terms of the range of things we're doing to support business. But we do have a bid into Scottish Government which is a town and bid resilience emergency fund, which is about a campaign to support local businesses, and that bid is in with Scottish Government, and I think like these things happen to move a lot faster than they used to, so I think we're hoping to hear shortly. So that's very much about a kind of digital marketing campaign to encourage people to be shopping locally post-COVID. That obviously is at the softer end of major infrastructure investment, which there's a huge amount going on actually in the city still in terms of council projects, both in housing, mixed use development, tram, North Bridge, etc. So that there is still a lot that the council is in terms of spending money. And I go back to the sustainability piece, the opportunity for investment and how we work with the private sector to think about co-investment on key kind of priorities, from retrofit of people's homes to electricity charging points to wider transport infrastructure, I think is massive and really exciting. And I know there's a lot of appetite actually within the financial services community, and we've got a workshop in the coming weeks through our kind of climate strategy to engage with them on what kind of future business models or investment models might look like in the sustainability space. So that may not be a shovel-ready screen for this November, but I think the awareness of the importance of a kind of capital investment and support a capital-focused recovery, I think is understood in Scottish Government. And I think, given that it's never been cheaper to borrow money ever, that there'll be a definite desire to do that where possible. But obviously, you need to have a revenue budget to pay for borrowing, how cheap it is. But so there's lots going on in the kind of capital space at the moment. There's no suggestion that current projects won't continue, although obviously all of them are being reviewed, and I think we can expect in the coming years to see more, not less, in that space, even though it's a difficult financial position, is my anticipation.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Paul, you want to come back in there?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Laurence, there was a report in the, I think it was Herald over the weekend, just saying about the Scottish commercial property market still looking pretty robust. There's a big article on that, and I suppose the question I'm kind of asking is, obviously with COVID, a lot of people have been working at home, and I know, for example, Royal Bank are saying don't go back till the end of the year and so on. Do you think there's going to be an ongoing problem with that, if people maybe work at home more permanently, and how has the council got a strategy to deal with that? Is it looking at the impact of that? Is it any anecdotal evidence at this time that might happen, and obviously that might affect footfall and so on?
Yeah, it's kind of one of the big questions, isn't it? All of this, we talked about people not going back to their cars, yet you're seeing traffic levels kind of gradually recover to where they were pre-COVID. The next big question is, what does the office environment look like in a kind of settled going forwards? And from a council perspective, that's why I raised it from our perspective, because I think, the debate is still very much going on. So I think there's probably other people that are better qualified than me to make a judgment. But as you said, the signs are the property market is holding up. So the bet on the market is that people will see the benefit of offices. And although you might see a more mixed model that we've all seen the benefit of, that we'll also see the benefit of going to places of work. So my take on it, for a personal opinion and a judgment, is I do think we'll see a step change in confidence of employers to let people work from home. I think that's including the council, which I think is a positive thing. But the idea that we're all going to work remotely and there no longer be demand for big offices and city centres, I think is probably won't come out. So I think it's a really big question, which we are looking and debating as much as other businesses in the property sector is. It's one of the key questions that will play out. I guess my only final thing to say is, you look back a month ago and how much has changed in COVID land in the last month. You look again forward a month, it will, schools will be back. I can blissfully report that my kids are in nursery right now, which is, a big thing for me personally. So I think, obviously down south you've seen, let gyms and swimming pools open over the weekend. So every month that goes by, I think we get a greater sense of what a new normal looks like. But I think we're still seeing how it plays out to some degree.
Yeah, Liz, just a supplementary, if that's okay. Laurence, the business tourism market's vitally important to Edinburgh as well. Do you see any change in that, or is a special enough to look around about how we can try and obviously encourage that to come up again? I know the conference centre's been affected, but the business market I think is really important if it's coming in terms of conferences, also in terms of people obviously coming up for trips, that kind of thing.
Yes, and obviously back to our council perspective, from a as you say, we are the single shareholder of Edinburgh's largest conference centre, so it affects very much our bottom line. And as you know, there were plans approved to build a hotel related to the EICC, so significant consequences on the council as a business or organisation as much as it is from a policy perspective. Clearly, for a long time, the business tourism benefit relative to just the tourism benefit is being widely understood. So kind of long-standing desire to have more of it in the city. Clearly, in the short term, that we're not seeing that. Although I think Marshall is pretty confident or bullish that he'll start to see that coming back to the ICC in the not too distant future. So I think it's something that we'll definitely need to encourage. And obviously, you're seeing a lot of events taking place via video conference. I'm sure we're all participating in those. How it looks like in 12 months' time, I'm not sure I've got more of an insight than yourself, except that I think we'll see a gradual return to the big events for the reasons that we all understand. Although you might see a bit more of a mixed economy, which will require the ICC, along with lots of other business tourism providers, the need to shift their business models.
Okay, thank you.
As always, brilliant to have you with us from City Council to give us an update. I'm sure there's lots going on in the background, and I think that's always the challenge, is getting the communication out there to let people know exactly what's happening. So very much appreciate you joining us. Thanks everyone for attending again. I hope you find these useful. I believe next week we don't have one. I think the next one is the 10th of August. I think we've got a break. So look forward to seeing you all then. Have a great week. Thanks very much, everybody.